All right. So I think we've onboarded everybody. Welcome. If those of you have joined us for the first time, I want to introduce you to UpLift, which is teletherapy for teens and young adults, really on a mission to support the mental health of our young people. Today we have an exciting panel. It's going to address a lot of stuff about college life and mental health strategies for college students. We have our co-founder, Dr. Amy Mezulis, who is also a chair and professor at Seattle Pacific University. We have Katie Ann Nicolai, who is a UpLift psychologist, a special guest expert, Nicole Williams with Seattle Psychology, and we have our college student, Hannah Morris. So I'm gonna pass it off to Amy to do some quick introductions of the team and we'll get started.
Thanks, Ian. Hello and welcome to everyone out there. I love and don't love these Zoom webinars because I know that there are people in the audience and I don't get to see your faces or even names or anything, but welcome to everybody. I hope there are some college students or rising college students out there. So I want to take just a minute to introduce myself and then I'll turn it over to our guests to introduce. So my name is Dr. Amy Mezulis. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. As Ann said, I am the chair and professor in the Department of Clinical Psychology, which is the PhD program at Seattle Pacific University. I'm also one of the co-founders and chief psychologists here at UpLift. My background is in adolescent and young adult mental health. So that is all my research. I've been funded by the NIH for most of the last 10 years, studying pathways to depression, anxiety, self-injury, and suicide among sort of 12 to 22-year-olds. I do a lot of research with the SPU college students. We run the student health survey on campus where we annually collect information on substance use and mental health among the SPU undergraduates. And I also supervise the mental health counseling program for the student athletes at SPU. So I've worked directly with a lot of college students in that capacity as well. And we're really thrilled today to be able to focus on this transition to college. Oh, and I have a rising college freshman. I almost forgot that. So I'm a mom doing this too. And we'll have to think about how to support my own daughter as she transitions to college this coming fall as well. So I come at this from a whole lot of different perspectives, both research and clinically and as a parent. We are really thrilled to have not only one of our own psychologists who's done a lot of work with college students, Dr. Nicolai, but to have two guests with us who offer perspectives from the community as well. Nicole Williams, who is a clinician locally who works with a lot of the UW students, and then Hannah Morris, who is a college junior. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about what her college transition was like. So without me taking away their intros, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to introduce herself, and then Hannah, and then Katie.
Hey, hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. As they said before, I work locally with college students. I graduated from Washington State University with a bachelor's in psych human development. I worked at the Sexual Assault Center of Pierce County with teens and young adults. Specifically, I worked in the department with teens and young adults that experience sexual exploitation, or if people don't know that sex trafficking, people, we use different words than the public does. After that, I went to the University of Washington, where I got my master's in child adolescent psychology with a focus on intervention and prevention. So of course, how do we intervene when things come up and mental health issues come up, but also how do we get ahead of it and try to help our teens and young adults be as prepared as possible. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I work with a lot of the UW college students. I get a lot of referrals from there. I love working with them. They're such a fun demographic, and I can't wait to get into it. Freshman year is so exciting. I guess that's it for me. I'll toss it back.
Thanks. Hannah?
Hi guys, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Hannah Morris. I'm a rising junior at Chapman University, and I'm studying business with a focus in marketing and finance, as well as a minor in graphic design. And I've had some interesting experiences with mental health throughout my entire college experience, and I wish I would have known about UpLift. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Thanks. And Katie?
Hi, I'm Dr. Katie Nicolai. I'm a licensed psychologist with UpLift. I did my PhD here in Seattle with Amy. And I spent a couple of years working in college mental health at a couple of different college counseling centers, University of Washington, and then also down in California before coming back up here and getting into private practice. So my areas of expertise include that college mental health population, teens and adolescents, and I also specialize in treating trauma and PTSD, depression and suicidality, and also complex family issues. So I'm really thrilled to be here. This is an area I'm really passionate about. And even though I can't see you all, I'm welcoming you and excited to be here.
Anne, you want me to get us started?
Okay, that sounds great. Yes. And I want to also note that we have a poll that is live. I see a few of you have already started voting and certain things. So it looks like 33% of you are concerned about uncertainty over COVID-19 restrictions. Making new friends, really mostly 67%, all of the above with academic stress. Also what creates anxiety for your child at school. We're looking at academic pressure, peer pressure relationships, and sort of structuring life away from home. Does your child currently or during high school see a therapist? And so many have said never. So this will be a good opportunity if you want to learn what resources are available to you on campus or remotely. So with that, Amy, let's get going on our first questions that we can ask our panel.
Perfect. And so some of you may have been part of our webinars before. We have a set of sort of prepared questions and comments, and then lots of time at the end to answer questions that have been brought up along the way. So some of the topics we're going to cover are: what are some of the most common challenges and stressors that all college students would face? And then what are some sort of unusual ones that you may not know are coming but should be on your radar? And then a little bit about how to think about your own student in that mix. What are the sort of strengths and challenges that they may bring to college uniquely, and how to think about those things together. So our first question is, what are the biggest challenges that incoming freshmen face when they start college? And I'm going to ask Katie to start a little bit by talking about stressors that all students face in the transition to college, sort of regardless of background, regardless of where they're going. And then Nicole's going to talk a little bit about the unique stressors experienced by underrepresented students. And then I'll finish a little bit by how to think about your own student in that transition. So Katie, why don't you start us off?
Great, happy to. So I based this a little bit on the years I spent working in college counseling centers. These are the most common presenting issues that students would come into the counseling center with. And in addition to that, at college counseling centers, we do a lot of community outreach. So we're talking to students and trying to get a read on what most students are facing. And so I kind of gathered all that data together and thought about what the most common problems are. And so is already reflected in our poll here, one of the top ones are academic worries. A lot of students feel like there's a big adjustment to college level academics. And this is everything from the logistics of just getting to classes. You can imagine as you're sitting, in your dorm room or even at home, if you're about to log into that online class, the routine of your high school experience has been completely upended, and everything from how do I walk to the classroom, what's the fastest way to get there, to like, what's it gonna be like logging into the Zoom for the first time? Who am I gonna sit with in class? What's the best way to take notes? These are all the logistical concerns that really raise students' anxiety and can make them feel like even getting to that first day of class is a big project for them. And then also, I think there's a layer with COVID-19 of the anonymity of college. A lot of students talk about this, especially in larger schools, but this can be the case at smaller private schools too, where all of a sudden you're completely unknown quantity. And even if you were a shyer student in your high school, your teachers knew who you were. They knew if you were absent or not. But now here at a college, you are one of possibly hundreds of students, especially in intro-level courses. Your professor isn't going to remember if you were in class or not. They're not going to contact your parents if you're not there. And so while I think there's an element of that that's exciting to students, getting to manage their own life and be responsible for themselves, there's that anonymity can feel really isolating and anxiety provoking. And then also students can, even if they have stellar academic histories, can really feel nervous with more challenging material, more independently oriented learning, no structure really being set in terms of like, you need to structure your homework this and such way to get things done. So those are a lot of factors under the academic umbrella. Another big stressor that students focus is in the social realm. So this is the second reason students refer relationship problems. So feeling nervous about finding that group. I think a lot of students complain about that, or not complain, but they feel like I have to find out who I am and who I belong with as soon as I get on campus, or I end up feeling really isolated because they see people kind of fracturing off into different clubs and sources of belonging. How do I choose the people that I'm going to spend time with? And what does that say about me? That can be really anxiety provoking. As simple as, who am I going to eat dinner with the first night on campus? Or if I'm not able to go to my campus in person, how am I going to make friends at all? Am I going to have a really lonely experience during this first year of college, which is completely not what I expected? And then there's the anxiety that I think mounts if students feel like they don't make friends in those first few days on campus. They're eating alone, or it's feeling like doing things online has made them really isolated and they don't really like connecting over the internet. What happens to me if I don't make that friend group in the first couple of days? And then if students are going onto campus, there's roommate stress. Have I ever shared a room with someone before? Or maybe I'm only used to sharing a room with a sibling or a family member. What's that going to be like? And then the huge question of parties. This may or may not be relevant if students are hanging out with their same peer group from high school and still living at home. But students who are going to campus in the fall, feeling like I need to go to parties in order to meet people and make friends, but I feel like I am nervous about being in those large environments and what do I do about substance use? And I think the last little point I'll make in this realm is that students often have, or schools frequently have introductory days, like a week of sort of celebratory festival type introductions for freshmen that help to orient students to college life. And it gives them tips on everything from managing academics. It gives them opportunities for socializing and connecting to clubs. There's often fairs that they'll put on where you can meet people. Everything from concerts to meals to ice cream socials. And they try to really add a lot of variety so that students can connect to each other. These are really fun and exciting days for students, but they can also be pretty overwhelming. And especially if they're all going to be happening online, you're getting inundated with all this information and you're sitting there taking notes. Will you ever return to those notes? Will you remember the number for the counseling center when you encounter an emergency? Will you remember that there is a club specifically meant for people who enjoy the same sports as you do or have your same interests? What's going to happen that first time that you're feeling an increase in anxiety? Are you going to keep any of those flyers? So there's a lot of information in those first couple of days. And so one thing I think to really think about as parents is how you're setting up your students beforehand so that they have all that info on hand and ready to go, and what additional support might you be able to provide them so that those days aren't quite so overwhelming.
Thank you, Katie, super helpful. Nicole, you want to talk a little bit about some unique challenges that some populations might experience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. That was a perfect transition for me. Okay, so obviously underrepresented groups, there's a lot of variability in that title alone, right? There's a lot of racial diversity, there's a lot of socioeconomic diversity, sexual identity. So to say what they all experience together is almost impossible, but I do think kind of cross-culturally, all these populations come in contact with microaggressions. And I know that's kind of like a buzzword to some people, like it pops up on the internet. So I want to talk about like what those actually are. And so they tend to be actions or comments that subtly and often unintentionally express a prejudice or like prejudice attitudes towards certain groups of people. Some examples would be telling Black students, you're way more articulate than I thought you would be. Or with Asian American students, there's that viral post of like, Professor emo back, like, can you choose an American name? That would be one of those situations. Telling queer students like, oh, I would never choose to be gay. Telling low income students that, oh, where you live is so ghetto or so scary. Or even with female students, the whole gamut of calling them cupcake or sweetheart when they're trying to present, which is not great. They're here to, learn and educate like everyone else. And so all these examples, I wish I could say I made them all up myself, but these are actually ones I've heard directly from Seattle area students. And it's been from peers, it's been from staff members, it's from professors, and it's coming from all different directions. And although they are often unintentional, they weigh really heavily on the person on the receiving end. It tells them really quickly, oh, I'm not welcome here. Oh, you guys had no plans for someone like me to be here. And sometimes it even goes so far to make students feel unsafe. Like, how do you approach that professor that when you're presenting keeps calling you pretty? Maybe you don't want to do that, And so Katie's absolutely right. There's like all these anxiety provoking stressors, but our underrepresented students have this added layer of like trying to figure out where they belong, if they belong, and who is safe, which kind of heightens all the stress. I had one student I thought did really well of kind of distilling what microaggressions did to her. And she was saying that it's this constant stream of reminders that like, oh, I don't really belong here. And I think in the midst of COVID, that kind of is different because a lot of it's online. So it makes it even harder to know, like, how do I respond to a passive aggressive email, like about my name? Or how do I explain to professor, you're kind of assuming I have a laptop, but I'm actually in the library. And those are really hard conversations and stressors that not every student has, and it can make them feel really isolated and alone. However, there are ways we can help our students with this, but I will get into that more later. At this time, that's just kind of an overview. And so I will pass it back off to the next speaker.
So we're beautifully a few minutes ahead of time, which never happens in these webinars. And I realized, Hannah, that I didn't have you on script to talk right now, but I wondered if we're talking a little bit about the first year and what's that like. I wonder if you could say something about the 2 or 3 things that surprised you about things maybe that you felt were stressful or unfamiliar that you had to adjust to that maybe you didn't know going in that you wish you had known.
Absolutely. I think some things that were definitely surprising were I really chose my initial school because I wanted a bigger pool and I wanted the experience of having the world as my oyster and being surrounded by literally like tens of thousands of other students that I could meet on the daily. But I don't think I really understood, as you guys mentioned, the anonymity that comes with that and how different that would be from my previous learning experiences at the previous institutions that I've attended, as well as, at least on my particular past campus, the anonymity socially, where you can meet someone in a dining hall or at a club fair and never run into them again. And so that was definitely surprising and something I'd never experienced before, which, again, not the case at plenty of schools. It just depends on the layout and the number, but this was my experience at a larger school. And I think also just seeing other people kind of go into groups pretty early and like sync up with a large group of people and feeling like, wow, why don't I have this? And kind of feeling inadequate because of that, but knowing and kind of like seeing later, like, these aren't necessarily friendships that stay. Sometimes they are, and that's wonderful. But I think often people kind of fall into the herd mentality, trying to find a group that they can cling on to pretty early. But if you're a student who doesn't find that, it can often be kind of scary because you're like, wait, am I at a disadvantage? Did I do something wrong? Why do I not have this peer group as early on when it's really incredibly normal?
Super helpful, thanks. And I know from working with college students myself, one of the things that is true is sort of the disconnect in the optics, that many students walk around feeling very disconnected and lonely, although to other students, they look like they're part of a group or a herd, right? And so that disconnect too of everyone's looking at you like as if you are one of those people who's found their niche and has friends and people to sit with, but you still walk around feeling like, I don't feel connected. I'm just like, I'm lucky to have a human next to me right now. That disconnect in the first year until you build substantial relationships is really strong. So thank you both. Thank you to everybody for those perspectives. I want to wrap up this section on like what the sort of how to think about that transition to college by showing a quick graphic, if that's okay. Anne, are you able to pull that up? When I think about mental health in general, and this is definitely true in transitions, I always think about the interplay between the stress that someone may face and the resources they have to handle that stress. And if we think about the first year of college, we know that we have stressors that we know about that everybody's going to face. There's an adjustment to the new academic demands, there's making new friends, there's homesickness, and there are stressors that may be unique because of someone's personal circumstances or are unexpected. So things like COVID-19 last year and this next year for incoming students are things that are going to be an additional layer of stress. As Nicole was talking about, there are some students who come in with personal backgrounds or identities or financial stressors that may increase the stress they experience. And of course, life does happen even during the first year of college. And so you also don't know what else your student may face in that first year. There may be traumatic events that happen on campus. There may be traumatic events that happen in someone's personal life that they need to respond to in a setting where they're away from home and maybe don't have the same social supports that they would have had at home. So that's sort of on that bottom axis there, that sort of stress from the typical first year stress all the way through traumatic events. And then on the y-axis, you see, that students are going to have more or less challenges that they bring to it uniquely. And so if your student has always handled stress well and is really well supported by family and friends, they may function very well even when their stress level increases. But a lot of students start college with additional psychological challenges. They may have already had some challenges with depression and anxiety, and that would probably be a communication to us as parents and educators that they may be likely to re-experience those problems with the new challenges of college. Maybe they have an ADHD or another executive functioning diagnosis that may make the transition to independent learning and managing their own schedule more challenging. Maybe they had a great social support network. They made friends easily, had a big friend network in high school, but in college, as both Katie and Hannah noted, they're having a difficult time recreating that social support network. And so when those stressors go up, they don't have the same sort of supports to rely on. And so when we think about how to support your student, you kind of have to think about both of these dimensions. You have to imagine like not only what stressors might I anticipate my student facing, but also which ones could I not predict, we'll just have to respond to. And what kind of resources do they go in with? Where is my student on that y-axis in terms of needing to have a plan in place? And as we're going to talk about in the next part of this webinar, if you think about those two things simultaneously, you can really personalize making a plan that ranges from, a list of resources sounds great, to actually, I kind of want to really have a clear plan with my student about how are we going to communicate about stress? How are we going to seek support when and if he or she needs it? Those are ways of personalizing some of this information to your child. So, and we can pull that down so people don't have to stare at a graphic. It's much more fun to stare at faces. So our second question then is, in terms of actual mental health problems, what are some of the most common mental health problems that students experience in that first year? And Katie, with all of your background and working in college counseling centers, I'm going to ask you to get started with what some of the most common referrals to counseling centers look like.
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm going to build off of that introduction that I gave before on some of the most common worries, and then expand on that a little bit into what are the reasons students actually go and seek mental health services, or when do common worries sort of rise to the level of being common mental health problems that students experience. And so those really fall into 4 categories, and these were, I've worked at several different college counseling centers, and these were every single year the most common presenting issues that we looked at. And so anxiety was always the number 1. That's the most common reason students refer, followed by depression. And then relationship problems and academic problems would usually interchange, whether they were the 3rd most common. So those 4, anxiety, depression, relationship problems, and academic issues. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those. So when it comes to anxiety, this is more, the word anxiety gets tossed around a lot, but we're talking about more than just the day-to-day worries or nervousness. So, some of us might feel a little nervous about hosting this webinar, but we're talking about a step beyond that, where anxiety is really impacting the way that you're thinking and approaching life and relationships day to day. And anxiety might, for college students, one of their common mental health issues might focus on academic problems. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. But worries about, am I going to be able to be successful in school? And this might look like spending an inordinate amount of time thinking and worrying about school and getting in the way of being able to get work done, and just expressing a lot of fear about what will happen if they can't succeed. Anxiety can also manifest as homesickness. This may or may not be relevant if your student is living at home, but that might instead look more like anxiety about the transition. So rather than missing home or feeling lonely, feeling more like, how am I going to live in this new role, even though I'm still living at home? And that I kind of think of as a sense of feeling unmoored, like, where am I going? I'm in a different phase of life now. And then social anxiety also comes up quite a bit. And I think this manifests differently depending on if you're going to be on campus or not. But going to a new place and being surrounded by thousands of new people is really social anxiety provoking. So if your student has already struggled with that a little bit in the past, this might be a time when that really spikes. And then I know that I personally have struggled a lot with adjusting to everything being online. And that's a whole different form of social anxiety. How am I going to appear on webcams? How am I going to interact with people over email? Will people be able to interpret what I'm saying accurately? Is everyone judging me? So I think the one thing to think about with anxiety, normal versus problematic. It's normal for everyone to worry about life transitions, for them to have a couple of sleepless nights here or there when they're thinking about a topic in particular. Times when this might be problematic are when it's interrupting their sleep. It's impacting their appetite consistently. They're not enjoying the things that they used to do. You're noticing that they're withdrawing from other people because they're worrying about things so much. It seems to be the only thing that they think about and talk about. It's starting to kind of consume their life, so that the old version of your teen that you used to know is now just become this very worried person. So that's a time when you might want to seek more professional support. The second category was depression. And again, this is different than just the normal ups and downs of mood. A lot of teens will have a little dip after graduation, sort of like the post-holiday slump that everyone experiences, where you're just feeling kind of like, okay, back to normal life. And that can be especially true with the pandemic. This may not be the summer that your graduating senior was anticipating having. And that's sad, and it's okay for teens to feel moody and to be a little disappointed with those outcomes. But depression is more than that. It's a more profound, impactful dip in people's mood. And these can center around feeling like a failure socially or academically. Those are words that I kind of, when a teen starts to talk about themselves really negatively, that can be a sign that depression is happening. Feeling overwhelmed by the day-to-day tasks of adjusting. It may seem like your teen is having trouble mustering just the basic energy to get going and complete the tasks of preparing for school. Talking about the future in really negative ways, like it's never going to get better, it's never going to get easier. This pandemic has ruined my college experience, and really kind of pushing that out into, it seems like it's going to be this way forever, and that forever is really negative. That's a sign that depression might be impacting your teen. And again, just like anxiety, things that you might notice when you might want to seek more professional help is when this really starts to consume their days. When a couple of weeks have passed and your teen is having trouble sleeping or sleeping too much, not eating or eating way too much, their day-to-day habits are really interrupted. They've lost interest in things, everything from TikTok to Friends, they're not really interested in doing anymore. And at times it can become as extreme to thinking about they don't even want to live anymore, thinking about suicide or that the future is never going to get better. So those are definitely times when you might want to seek support of a professional therapist. Relationship problems. This is not an official mental health diagnosis. However, it's one of the most common reasons students refer. And this centers around, I think, conflicts that they might have internally and with their friends. A lot of reasons why students come in is because they're having a conflict with a roommate, or they're in a new friend group, but that friend group is not really shaking out to be the way that they wanted it. Struggling to find a sense of belonging at school. And then also romantic relationships, feeling adrift, or perhaps they're in a romantic relationship that has now ended because college is starting, or they're feeling unsure about the future of their romantic relationships, or they're having their first romantic experiences, and it's really overwhelming and intimidating. And then also family concerns also come up in this realm because their role as a human being is shifting in the world. They're transitioning from a child who's lived at home, or maybe has already been behaving as an adult for a period of time, and now into a completely new role. And so figuring out who you are in your family and who you want to be forever is a big concern for a lot of folks. So again, normal versus problematic. So it's normal for teens to feel stressed about relationships and to, go through a breakup, to cry and feel upset and withdraw from their family for a little while. Times when you might think their relationship problems are becoming problematic are, again, when it's consuming their days, when it's all they're thinking about, and trying to find that balance between the amount of stress that they're experiencing, but also wanting to just kind of focus more on themselves and their own well-being. That might be a time when you might want to check in with a therapist. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. All right, I'm doing a halfway check. Wow, Nicole and Katie, you just have so much valuable information. I feel like we could peel off many of these layers and do webinars or sessions. I sent a note in the chat, but I want everybody to know who's watching that Q&A will be available the last 10 minutes at about 10:50. So please feel free to submit your questions. We will do our best to answer all of them in the last half of our chat, but we've got a couple of really good things coming up next. Hannah sharing some personal stories, and I'll kick it back off to you, Amy. Just want to let everybody know to submit some questions.
Yep, and I've seen a couple questions pop up, so thank you for those. We'll get to them. The theme of the questions being life does not look normal for college students this fall, and how can we help them with not only a normal transition, which would have been stressful, but with an unusual stressful transition. So what we're going to do now is turn to Hannah. And Hannah, thank you so much for being here and being willing to talk about your experience, because for those of us who went through college so many years ago, we don't really have a good on-the-ground experience of what it's like to be a college student in transition. And I know you're a local student, so you moved from Washington to where you went to college. But could you say a little bit about what you would want parents and rising freshmen, what you wish you had known then that would have helped your first year be a healthier experience for you?
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm just so happy to be able to share my experience and kind of express what I feel I've learned. So as I kind of stated previously, I had attended much smaller schools and institutions before initially going off to college. And I was so gung-ho about heading off to a larger institution. I was like, I want to see the great wide world, and just kind of, I want something totally new, totally different, other coast, really big. I just want to experience something really new. And my parents kind of told me, they're like, this is going to be more difficult, kind of trying to prepare me. I think I kind of had my blinders up, and I was like, nope, this is what I want. I know what I want. I know what I want to do, and I can do this. And it's fine. I've always been very self-sufficient, just kind of able to go with no real issues socially or just in general, aside from the normal stuff. And then I got to school, and I was kind of awestruck by the feeling of not really knowing what was next, not really knowing who I should eat with, not really knowing if it was appropriate to kind of really reach out and make friends in class, or what kind of was the norm on another coast in a completely different environment than I had ever experienced. And that really shook me because I had never experienced something like that. And I also didn't really prepare to be shaken up like that. I kind of assumed, oh, I've made my way through other obstacles before. This will be fine. This will be just like everything else. But that turned out not really to be the case. I just struggled more with more mundane things than I would have expected, and obviously than I would have liked. It was harder to do everyday things, and just kind of, it was sad not to really like have a direction and just be kind of overwhelmed with the prospect of school as a whole, and that there was no real solace in that was definitely kind of overwhelming. And I think what I would have liked to know was that it is really okay to reach out for help. I hadn't viewed myself as the type of kid who would have ever needed therapy or needed to talk to someone or even needed any sort of those skills or coping mechanisms. I was just like, oh, I'm fine. I'll bootstrap it. I'll figure it out. But that doesn't always work. It's not always that simple. And you have to kind of understand that you don't always have all the answers. And sometimes it's important to turn to your parents or other support systems and really be like, hey, I'm struggling right now and I need resources. And I think had I been more open to actively using the resources that were available and that were at my disposal, it definitely would have been an easier transition. But instead, I just kind of stuck my head in the sand and kept on thinking, wow, I'm using a ton of different metaphors right now, but just kept trying to dig myself out of the trench that I was still making. So I think my main takeaway is like, I don't know how many actual students are watching this, but like to the students who have been like this in the past that are like, I'm gonna figure it out myself, I don't need help. It's okay if you do. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it really is okay to need help. And college is a difficult time. And I feel like people don't talk about that as much. Adults often frame it as their glory days and like, oh my gosh, I remember when I was in college, this is so incredible. And it is. But it's also important to remember that they're framing the entire college experience in a sort of hindsight, rose-colored glasses type of sense. And it's not always going to be unicorns and rainbows, and it's okay. That happens to everyone. Everyone struggles in the beginning, and I think that's something I definitely wish that I would have known.
Super helpful, Hannah. Thank you. I want to amplify two things that Hannah said. One is the sort of massive dissonance between your expectation of what your college experience was going to be like, the like huge hopes and dreams you had, and what it was actually like. And I think that is a challenge that a lot of students face, is so many high school kids are like just laser focused on, I'm getting to college, this is my dream, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm expecting. And all of us as adults have known this, like nothing is ever what we really thought it was going to be like ahead of time. And when you're 17, 18, 19 years old, that disappointment that it's not, you're not all of a sudden a massively different person. Suddenly all your pre-existing anxieties and concerns are still there. And they're now there in a new setting, that disconnect can be really hard for people. And the other thing I want to amplify is, it's interesting. And what we're going to talk about this in the next segment is sort of like, who is your student in this and how do you need support? And I have mixed feelings, not mixed feelings, but there's mixed data on whether or not, if your student has already had concerns with anxiety or depression in the past, has already been in counseling, is already on medication, for example, to some extent we would say, yeah, actually they're more at risk in college because we already know that is a set of problems that pops up for them when stress increases. On the other hand, those are students who have had challenges and have figured out how to go seek resources for those. They know how to ask for help. And that skill set of knowing how to ask for help is a really valuable one in the transition to college. And so sometimes I'm more worried about the kids who, like Hannah, have like always been fine and I got it. And I know I can handle anything life throws at me, because when they've never had to practice asking for help, that's a really hard skill set to learn on the fly on your own. And so all of us out there as parents, we all know our kids. And so that would be something I'd be thinking about as a parent, is not just what challenges and resources my kids had, but does my kid know how to ask for help? Has my kid ever had to ask for help? And would they know when they needed to and how to do that? And to not take for granted that they could figure that out on the fly. So with that in mind, we're going to move to our last topic, which is how do we help students plan for this transition? And we're gonna end again with Katie and Nicole. Katie's gonna talk a little bit about resources and planning appropriate to sort of all students, and Nicole talking a little bit about some particular things that some students might want to think about in the transition. So Katie, why don't you get us started?
Great. Yes, and I'm going to keep it brief so that there's plenty of time for Nicole and plenty of time for questions, because we definitely want to hear all of your input out there. So I'm going to talk just briefly about creating a coping plan with your student. And this is something that I think it would be awesome if every parent could sit down and do with their student. You know, you're going shopping at Target for all their stuff, or getting prepared to have them do school at home, buying all the things on the list, and just add this to the to-do list of things to do is creating this coping plan with your student. So the first step is assessment, and this is assessing your students' personal strengths and challenges in terms of their academics, their social life, the level of independence that they're comfortable enacting right now, and also their mental health history. So just kind of going down the list and feeling and getting their input on, like, what are you most nervous about? What are you feeling most excited and hopeful about? How can I support that? And then once you've done that assessment with them, identifying a list of resources based off of maybe the challenges that they listed. So what kind of support can be tailored to your child's specific needs? Are they going to be continuing to take medication for a mental health concern? How can you set them up to make sure that there won't be any interruption in their mental health or medication management plan? Are they feeling really nervous about academics? Is there a way that you could set up tutoring or writing support ahead of time, or at least have that information on hand so that they know where to go and get it if and when that time arrives? And then what about therapy? Are there things that they're feeling like they'd like to receive a little bit more personal support on? And you as their parent, even though you want to be there for them in every way that you can, you know, we don't always have the time or the professional expertise to deal with every single topic that our teen builds up. So why not get them some therapist continuity before they go off to school and encounter any of these problems? And if they use it, that's fantastic. If they don't need it, then at least it was there as sort of an insurance policy. And the last little point that I'll add in is that together with a therapist or on your own, you can build a coping plan to deal with times of particular challenge. And this is something that, again, I wish all parents would do ahead of time with their student before they go off to school, because often when things get really sticky and they're already at school, they're in a panic. And before things get to a crisis, let's just have a plan in place. And this can be as simple as making a list of people to call, either to talk about specifically what's going on, or just to check in and feel connected to another person who cares about them no matter what. So making a list of people, and then activities that they can actually do either by themselves or with others. I like both. And then some things to distract them. So like some fun activating activities, but also things to relax them, you know, watching Friends on Netflix versus going for a walk, for example. These can be simple things, but making sure there's variety on that list. And then last, recognize signs of being able to recognize when is it an emergency, when is the challenge that I'm facing elevating to the level of like, I 100% cannot do this by myself. And that might be times when they're thinking about suicide, or times when their mental health is feeling very extreme. Having a list of phone numbers pre-arranged, pre-saved into their phone so that they can just dial that number and get connected to someone who cares. So I'll keep that brief, and I'll toss it over to Nicole.
Okay, perfect. So I'm also just going to build off of some things Katie said. I feel like I just keep taking your stuff. I'm going to talk about some of the resources that are out there, but I first want to talk about what parents can do, because I think a lot of times parents can feel kind of helpless when their kids come to them with problems. This is kind of focused on underrepresented students, but I think it's applicable to all parents. Just everyone can do this. One is just asking how they're doing outside of grades. I've had a lot of students say that, like, parents aren't really sure how to approach the mental health stuff. So they're just like, do you have A's? Okay, great. But like actually asking how emotionally they're doing, just listening and validating. So we talked earlier about microaggressions, and Katie said something really that stuck with me was when they're thinking about it over and over. So if there's probably a discussion post, because who knows when students are going to campus, but if on like an online post or an email, there's like a passive aggressive comment and they're just thinking about it all the time, but it's like, but they didn't really say it mean, but maybe they didn't mean to hurt my feelings, and just kind of being there to say, it's okay that you were hurt by that. It's okay if you're angry about that. And sometimes that's all a student needs to hear, is that like you can have feelings about this situation. And that's invaluable. The other thing I think parents could do is kind of talking about what steps the student wants to take and kind of not judging them for that. So oftentimes when students have to advocate for themselves, whether it's a microaggression or just really trying again to get across, I don't have as much access as you think I do to technology during COVID. Excuse me, I'm talking a lot today. I think it's important to just say, okay, do you feel like you can handle emailing that professor? Are you worried about how that's going to change how they treat you? And that's a valid worry. Are you concerned about, I don't know how to advocate myself and pass this chemistry test, and I kind of feel guilty that I'm going to just let it go? And that's something I hear a lot, that like, I should have stood up for myself, but I had all this test. Am I a bad person? And just kind of being there to say, you're not. Like, do what you have to do. And there is such a thing as activist fatigue. So like standing up for yourself all the time is very draining. And we want our students, especially from underrepresented groups, to stay in the classroom. And sometimes they're so busy advocating, that doesn't happen, unfortunately. And so we want to be able to just say, whatever you choose, I support you, but let's look at these options. Going back to campus and resources. So on campus, there are a lot of like community-centered groups. I know at UW and Wazoo, there's like whole floors in the Student Union building that are literally just community-specific. There's a veterans room, there's a Q center for LGBTQ students, there's culture centers. It's really great. There's always great food and they're very nice people. So I recommend people when you get to campus to check those places out. But also if you go to any college's website and you look up student services is usually the name of the tag, you can find those groups online. And I really recommend during this unstable time with COVID to check those out, because they know you can't come to campus. So for example, the Q Center at UW was doing Zoom hangouts for incoming freshmen. Like, we want to help you build community even if you're not here, or how can we help you if you're worried about showing up? Are you scared about COVID? So there's like a lot of centers that are trying to do outreach via online, but it's hard to see on the main page. You got to kind of dig for it. So I really recommend kind of clicking around and finding what's there for your student. Also in terms of academic support, because academics is college, that's what we're all dealing with. There are things like the Writing Center. I even went there when I was in college. I loved it. You can walk in and be like, I'm bad at research papers, and there's awesome PhD students that will help you. Just super great. There's also tutors for every subject from art to engineering on most, if not all, Washington State campuses. I'm pretty confident in that, which I always recommend. And like sometimes it just helps, and like you don't have to be failing a class to see a tutor. I always like to tell students that you can just get that extra support and like try to keep up with how fast some of these lectures go. Quarters are very hard. So I would recommend getting tutors. And then there's counseling services, which I think was touched on, so I won't go too deep into that, but all students have counseling services on campus. They work really hard to get students in. They also refer out to the community therapists like me, so I meet a lot of my clients. But especially during COVID, I think reaching out to them, I believe a lot of campuses are doing telehealth. A lot of therapists in the community are doing that. And then of course there's UpLift, which is telehealth. You guys all know that. But I think that's so important when it's hard to go out in the community and there's kind of isolating feelings. Sometimes having counseling services are really great. I think telehealth is great in between student schedules. I see students that will go to class online and then do their therapy online and then click into their next Zoom class. And that's just super convenient. And I think it's really great for right now. This is an unprecedented time, so kind of resources are going to look different. But I really recommend kind of just searching around and remembering that the school does want your student to succeed. And there's going to be services, especially, last thing I'll say, I know I'm almost out of time, low income students. I recommend looking for those services in the student services tab as well. I know from experience, like if you don't have a laptop, if you don't know how to fill out financial aid, there's people that will sit down and do it with you. And there's also, they'll check out laptops to you or recorders or whatever you need to be successful. So don't be afraid to search those things and seek those. So I'm done. I guess I'll toss it back. I believe we're getting ready for the Q&A.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you to all our panelists for offering your expertise and your experiences. So we've had a couple questions come in that I'll take and sort of get moderated. And one of these, and I know who this parent is, so my heart's breaking for your child. But just found out my child's college is closing permanently. And I think we're all a little bit worried that that's gonna happen to more and more universities this next year. And so she'll not be able to attend in the fall. How do I help her figure out what to do next when everything is already so uncertain? So I think I'll give my like parenting / psychologist response. And then actually I might ask Hannah to say something briefly about like, if this was you, what would you want from your parent? So I think the first thing I'll echo back something that Nicole said, which is the importance of the listening and validating stage before moving to the problem solving stage cannot be overstated. One of the biggest complaints we get from adolescents and young adults is that their interactions with their parents are so forward looking at what are you going to study? What are your grades? What are you going to do? How are we going to solve this problem? And that's a big role that parents have in raising our kids, is that we help them sort of craft a future. I get that. It can feel really invalidating to the student to not first be heard about what this feels like. And so I'm imagining that this student is like so devastated, right? I mean, this expectation, Hannah was talking about this expectation of what the college experience is going to be like, has been taken away after a whole spring of senior year that's been taken away. This is a huge loss, and sort of allowing that to be true and sitting with that for a while feels to me like the very first step. With problem solving coming when the student is ready to problem solve. And, you know, from a professional perspective, I think one of the things that's important to do when you get to the problem solving stage is to do a little bit of assessment around what are the biggest sort of guiding values or principles that we're going to use in solving that problem. Are we focused on, is the most important thing getting a college experience? Is the most important thing managing the money and uncertainty? Is the most important thing the content of classes and moving towards that degree? Because that might shape what some of those problem solving decisions are. But doing that sort of initial, like, what are the priorities? What would a good resolution, what problems would it address? That might be the first way to start. So I'm going to end there and say, and Hannah, is there anything you want to say about if this was you, if you were told your university was closing, what would you want from your parent in the next couple weeks?
First of all, whoever the student is and anyone else in a similar situation, my heart absolutely goes out to you. Even seeing peers and friends who were seniors this past semester, I cannot imagine losing my senior spring. So my heart goes out to you, and good job, guys. I think what I would have liked from my parents in terms of support, had I been in a situation like that, is kind of knowing that I'm going to have to deal with it in my own way. Again, as Amy touched on, just giving them space and like not necessarily moving right into problem solving, but just knowing that the reaction could be delayed, could just kind of be like sitting under the surface for a while, and knowing that there are going to be a bunch of different ways, like kind of doing self-care to address this, like whether that is going and seeing friends from a distance, or whether that is going and taking a drive at like 11 p.m. just to clear your head. And I think giving the student as much space as they need to process, but also giving them a hug and words of wisdom when it seems like that's the right time.
Super helpful. And it is really validating to hear, because I know I say this all the time, and it's still, as a parent, so hard to practice. My 14-year-old, who is one of the wisest human beings anyone will ever meet, in part probably because she's been in therapy since she was like 10 years old. One of the things she says to me when I click into the natural parent problem solving mode is, Mom, I think this might be your anxiety speaking. And I find it so, I know, it's hilarious, but it's like, it's a reminder to me that when I feel the need to like make things less uncertain to solve the problem, that is my own anxiety speaking. And of course, the biggest thing, this is one of the other questions that came up, is how does the parent-child relationship change in this time? You know, our kids are growing up, and some of this is starting to differentiate between the parent and the child and who gets to solve the problems on what terms. And that's an important part of the young adult transition, is recognizing that their emotional experience may be different from our emotional experience, and their desired way of problem solving, let alone the actual solution, might be different from our way of problem solving and the solutions that we would propose. And that's hard for parents. It's hard for us to let that go, but it is, I think, as much ownership as we can give back to the student to drive that is probably where we're going to see the best. Okay, another question that came up, this is a great question. This is coming back to Katie, and you might be able to then, because I think we're probably wrapping up, you could probably mention briefly a little bit about what we're planning for the summer. The question is, it would be great if you had some suggestions for how to frame that coping assessment. Do you have a suggested list of questions that parents could ask their kids to start the process of creating a coping plan? Do you want to take that?
Sure, I would be happy to, and I'll keep it brief so we have time for maybe one more question and talking about the upcoming summer. So I would just keep it very simple and go in and approach it from that strengths and challenges position, and really get your listening ears on and be open to whatever your student presents, but sit down together and talk about hopes and fears. What are you most excited about? What are you most nervous about? And then talk about that historically. Like in the past, what have been your strengths when it comes to problem solving, and what have been areas that have been more challenging for you? And really get your student or your team to generate a lot of that content for you. You can help them and guide them with like, oh, I remember, back when, you lost the championship on your soccer team, that was a really challenging time for you. And then get them to comment more on that, and then generate sort of a list of strengths and weaknesses. And then you can adapt that coping plan to deal with those weaknesses ahead of time. So that, I'll just mention that briefly as a good starting point for assessment.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I would echo everything Katie said. I might think about doing that in specific topics and domains. So thinking about academics, thinking about like advocating, communicating with professors or people sort of in charge, peer relationships, maybe romantic relationships too, navigating the social life, like partying, substance use. Where have they found success and where have there been challenges already, and how can we build off those? I will say, this is my very tiny plug, but one of the things that UpLift is doing this summer is working one-on-one with families that have kids heading off to college, and we'll have more information on that up on the website, and when we send this Zoom link out, if that is that we will help work with your family and your teen on going through that process of assessment and developing a personalized coping plan and set of resources, if that would be of service to families. And last question I'm going to give to Nicole, please. What are you seeing when you're working with college students right now? So we have sort of COVID layered on top of college life, layered on top of all the other stuff college students bring, and we only have about a minute left, but are there any sort of unique concerns that you're seeing among students, or unique supports that you're finding that they need right now?
Such a good question. I would say on top of all of that, just kind of the side effects in general of the trauma of COVID. I think like some of them are irritable. I think I had quite a few college students that had to move out of the dorms and are just heartbroken, expressing very high levels of apathy and just being like, well, it doesn't matter because I can't control this anyway. I also think that just feeling a lot of frustration among college students that their learning styles aren't being taken into account. There's some kids that do really well in a classroom that just quite frankly really struggle on online classes, and they feel kind of pressure at times from parents that are like, well, you got A's last time. What's wrong now? And it's like, well, I don't learn well in this arena, and they kind of feel a lack of support, that maybe this is just harder for them, and it's kind of making them question, like, can they do college? Am I smart enough? So if I was going to say how we can be more supportive during this time, is just reminding them that like, it's okay that you're struggling during a pandemic, during kind of a civil rights movement happening downtown, and kind of the ongoing fears of what will happen to my college life, and just kind of accepting that maybe you're not going to get all A's, and that doesn't mean you're not smart right now. It means you're overwhelmed. So that's kind of something I've seen a lot of, just support about it's okay that you're struggling academically.
And I'll add to that one more thing that we're seeing in our college students, and Nicole, you can nod and say if you're seeing this too, is sort of that combination of students feel unusually overwhelmed by the amount and type of remote learning work they're being asked to do, which I think as a professor myself, I think as professors sort of overcompensating for not having the classroom by like sending a lot of stuff over these remote learning platforms. But from the student perspective, it feels very overwhelming. And so one of the additional concerns I think students are raising clinically is how do they advocate for themselves, especially when they don't have a relationship with some of these professors, right? Like they've never met this person live. They don't really have any way of advocating or communicating for yourself. I don't know if that's something that you're noticing too, Nicole.
I would say absolutely. I think that it's a lot easier in class. I've been in classrooms where the professor just starts listing assignments and like slowly a hand goes up and it's like, can we not do all of that? But students can't really say that over the internet. And so it is really hard. I think that a lot of times they're very nervous about sending that email. And I think that professors are also stressed. And I think sometimes professors could respond better to the email, which is hard. I think just having parental support around like, at least you tried to send the email, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And kind of how do you balance your time? I think a lot of students have more coursework now than they did pre the pandemic, which is very odd. And I do think it's overcompensation. So they might need some time scheduling help.
Awesome. We are definitely at time. And anything you want to say to close us out? You want me to close us out? What do you want to do?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining today. Such important topics as we head into the summer and prepare our students for back to school. We're going to have this up on the UpLift website, so look for the link. And we've also live shared it through Facebook. So if you are on Facebook, share it out with your communities as well. And thanks for joining us.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. And really, thank you to our guests, Nicole and Hannah. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your expertise. It's really helpful for, I think, parents and kids to get a variety of perspectives. And to all the parents and kids out there, if we can be of support in any way, there are a lot of resources up on the UpLift website, and you can always reach out to me. My email is on there as well. So thanks so much.
All right. Bye, everybody.